Accepted.
Yeah, the interruptings are welcomed. A lot of Yidden Goyim on YouTube don't understand what this thing is that people interrupt, but other Yidden understand, so. Nah, I don't know. Yeah, try. Try to be reasonable. Yeah. Yeah, the class is starting now. I'm already on my recorder. So take the piece. It's in my computer bag. Anyways, this is the second class in this series. Next week Tuesday is coming Rav Inbal. Hopefully, I'm advertising it here, so anyone that knows should come. Maybe tomorrow in Borough Park, we'll find out. But the tachlis is like this. So I plan to do a little series. I still plan on the most general, like from outside, not from inside, because that takes forever. But from outside to discuss this book called the Book of the Knowledge. That's what we said. Because Hamada. Nicht knowledge, the knowledge. And we explained last week, basically, why there has to be such a book, according to the Rambam, of course. Right? And the basic thing is that it has to be such a book because a human being is made to know. That's what he does best. So therefore you have to know things. And that's like tachlis, or the goal of the end of a human being. Of course, not stop knowing things, knowing truths, and so on, because knowledge is the same thing as truth and chili. And so therefore there has to be such a book. And we also discussed two or three levels of why it has to be in this book. Because one reason is that since people have to know things, so anyone that writes a book, or anyone that has like a platform, is mechiv to teach them things of knowledge. Because otherwise it's like, what is he doing, bichlal? And then we discussed that that's something the Rambam very clearly does it in that way. Like, since I have a microphone, I'm going to tell you things that you should know. In this Sefer Hamada, which is explicitly like, on Thursday I like explained it even nicer. It's like he has a shir mishnayos where all the push to and come. That's his book, Sefer Hamada. It's very basic. It's not basic, but it's meant to explain the Mishnah, like give you the background and explain it, give you the maskunas like Gemara usually. And once he has a shir mishnayos set up, so he's like, wait, I have to teach you. And it says beferish in Sefer Hamada, in the page 2 of this. If you don't believe me, in page this I didn't have last week, but in page, I'm not going to go through this now, but in page 3, I give you 7 different sources in Perish HaMishnah, where the Rambam says, I went out of the subject, so it's not Yitzusim in Indian or Charagnim in Indian, different translations, and it's always subjects of Das, of Eminah. There's actually certain subjects that he seems to come back to all the time, but it's beferish not. It doesn't say to understand the Mishnah you have to know this. No shayachos with understanding the Mishnah. It's just since it's a Mishnah and this is an important thing to know, so I'm going to tell it to you. So that's step 1. Okay, now step 2 we said is that that's not enough. So that's like a good enough reason, and you can say, okay, so the same thing if the Rambam is writing this halachos sefer, he wants everyone to learn it, or every Yid has to know the Tarek Mitzvos. So everyone's going to look in his sefer. So the first thing he wrote in his sefer was to write all these Inyanei Amina, Inyanei Das, that you have to know. Of course, it caused him a lot of problems. If he would have just written the halacha parts, he would have had a lot more success, but that's a different politic. But he believed, and that's we discussed the Geras Ches HaMeistim, where he explicitly says this. Like I just wrote my book to help people, and part of helping them is to give them this information or this knowledge. So it explains how it has to be in this kind of book, and I also quoted it here. We did it last week. Then we did the second level of this, which I didn't have like a very clear. There's a clear place where he says this, which is in Tamiya Mitzvos and Chele Gimel. I should have brought it here. Maybe we'll still get it inside in a second. But the more important thing is that he thinks that not only is it like an important thing to know as a human being, and like therefore, since he's being a Yid is part of being a human, or it's the best way of being a human, so you have to know it. It's also in part of the Torah, right? So when he says there's Tarek Mitzvos, and Rambam, the first one, or at least in some sense the first one, who said that part of the Tarek Mitzvos, or maybe a big part of them, we counted, not in this year, in the other year we counted, that Sefer Hamada is the book with the 14, the Rambam has 613 divided in 14, they're not equally distributed. There's some Sforim like only one mitzvah, or not even any mitzvahs, I think, or like mamish 1 or 2. But if you count like how many mitzvahs fit into each, like it should be divided equally, you should have something like, no? I don't know. Yeah? Yeah, it's not equally distributed.
28, 42, 36.
Yeah, how about calculate it? Because I'm lazy. It should have been like 50 mitzvahs in each, 48. Sorry, I did it less than that. More like 45. I wrote the wrong number. Anyways, it should be 43. 43 and a half. Okay, almost 44. Anyways, but in reality, there's very lopsided. So that's Stamaz. I don't know if it's a question, but in reality, the only book that has more mitzvahs in Sefer Hamada is Sefer Avodah. And that's very obvious because Avodah is all the karbanos, and karbanos is the thing that the Torah has the most mitzvahs about. The Rambam, not the Rambam, but the Torah has the most mitzvahs about karbanos, and that's the biggest one. But after that is Sefer Hamada. Sefer Hamada has, I quoted it here, it has 75 mitzvahs. So, Yosem Echalka, more than it deserves, clearly. If it would have been equal distribution, it's much more than it deserves. It has 75 mitzvahs, most of them in Hilchos Avodah Zarah, okay? But, in other words, the Rambam not only thought that it's important, like it says in Perish Mishnayos, it's Kamat Astira to this. Like Perish Mishnayos never has, like, this is the correct place to discuss the Inyana Yamana. I know we even discussed this a long time ago in class about Didgal Mikrim, that the Rambam almost explicitly says that Didgal Mikrim doesn't say in the Mishnah. Because if it would have said in the Mishnah, he could have just said this is to understand Pshat in the Mishnah, you have to know this. But he doesn't say that. He says this Mishnah, maybe there's like one shtickle that says in the Mishnah that's connected, but he says this is going out of the out of subject, because it's an important thing. So he doesn't actually think that it's the Pshat in the Mishnah, or it's the needed for the Pshat in the Mishnah. But it's important, so therefore he says it. But when he comes to Sefer Mishnah Torah, he doesn't do these kind of things. And we also discussed more in the other class that the whole Mishnah Torah, I think, you could check, I didn't do a very good search, but I think in the whole Mishnah Torah there's nothing that's off topic. It never goes off topic. Like in the Gemara is full of going off topic, because it's the same Amayra, so he might as well give you some other things about him. The Rambam, I think, never goes off topic, or when he does, like there's some things that he's like, this doesn't really belong here, and he always explains, like it doesn't really belong here, but I need to find a place to put it, and it is the place that matches the best place. He never, like, he never like forgets himself and like, well, once I've been talking, let me say more things. It always stays on topic. So he doesn't really have this option of going off topic in Mishnah Torah. We discussed this. And another thing we discussed is that, unlike Perish HaMishnah, which is based on Mishnayos, right? As the Seder HaMishnah, the Rambam explicitly in the Kedama of Sefer HaMitzvos, where it discusses his plan for Mishnah Torah, says he was thinking how to organize the Sefer, he was thinking of organizing it in the Seder HaMishnah, and decided not to do it. So he makes his own Mishnah, like he says, he makes his own Mesechtes and his own Sidurim and his own Prokim, right? He has Sidurim are Sfurim and Mesechtes are halachos, and then Prokim and halachos like the Mishnayos have, but he doesn't go in the order of the Mishnah at all, and it's not clear why, like what was wrong with more or less working with the Seder of Mesechtes. Okay, it's not organized enough, and logically sometimes it's a Mesechta that's two halachas, sometimes the halacha with two Mesechtes and things like that. But also there's another interesting thing, which is that the Rambam has like an opening in Mishnah Torah can be based on psukim, not only on Mishnayos. So sometimes there's entire halachas that are based, there's no Mishnah about, or entire prukim. I don't know if there's entire halachas, maybe possibly Hilchos Dayas. We could say there's Pirkei Avos about it. Possibly Hilchos Yesod Torah. Possibly Hilchos Tshuva. There's like maybe one Mishnah in Yuma that's Mekar for Hilchos Tshuva and something like that, but it's not a real. The Ramban says this already in his letter on the Rambam, that Hilchos Tshuva was a chiddush that the Rambam organized from. It was malakit from Maimonides and so on, but it's not. There's no Masechtas Tshuva or anything like it in Shas. But what there is psukim, maybe more in Novi than in Chumash. But there's a lot of text in Tanakh about Tshuva. So in a certain sense, and this is interesting, in a certain sense, the fact that the Rambam does all this aguda and all this like Yesod Adas or Deis in Sefer Hayad has to do with the fact, and in Perish HaMishnah he says that it's off topic and he has to like kvetch it around, has to do with the fact that, and to a certain extent at least in Sefer Mishnah Torah, he has the liberty or the ability to make his own mitzvah straight out of the Chumash, straight out of the Rambam makes that, like, there's a certain mitzvahs, like Velez Surah, there's different mitzvahs that he mamish magdeh by himself. There's, of course, everything that you could, Reb Chaim Kanievsky has a medrash for everything. Sometimes those medrashim were written after the Rambam. But in reality, like, even if there is a makar for everything, it's not like there isn't a masechta for it. It's still a big difference, like how central it becomes and things like that. So I think that's part of this trick. It's like Yesod HaTorah, of course, Shema Yisrael, the psukim that he brings, Alech Hashem Lekecha are psukim. So, and they're even important psukim if you read the Chumash. And the Rambam has makes that into a mitzvah and says this is a whole halachos of that, but in Shas you're not going to find hilchos Metzias Hashem. There's no perek about that in the whole Shas. So that's how it works. But anyways, that was also a little shtickle side note. We did this just chazering from last week, not in the other class. We didn't do it here. And then, but more importantly, and this is we did do here more at length. More importantly, is that the Rambam understands not only so there's a bunch of mitzvahs that are mitzvahs hadas. So like if the Sefer Halacha, it's very interesting. People think there's Rambam, there's halacha and aguda. There's not. Sefer Hamada, there's halacha. It's just hilchas. Like Rav Hutner, like the Sefer Rav Kook. It's hilchas des. Hilchas des is actually wrong. He liked to call hilchas des but hilchas des means midas in the Rambam. It's really hilchas esodat or hilchas Sefer Hamada. It's halacha, just like there's mitzvahs of things that you do. It says beferish in Sefer HaMitzvos in the Shorish Tez, I think. So there's 4 kinds of mitzvahs. There's action mitzvahs, there's feeling mitzvahs, and there's talking mitzvahs, and there's believing mitzvahs. 4 categories of mitzvahs. So there's mitzvahs of what to believe or what to know. If you don't like the word believe, that's part of the mitzvah. So and it's even so that's number 1. That's step 2. Okay, so not only is it like important, so therefore we have to, since we have a microphone, we have to say it. It's also like one of the mitzvahs or a lot of the mitzvahs, 75 of them. A big chunk of Tarek mitzvahs are about this. Okay, now step 3 is even more than that, is what the Rambam says. He never says this explicitly enough. I mean, the most clear place where he says this is in Tamei Mitzvahs and Moreh Nevuchim, I think. In other places, he even contradicts this. There's a whole problem about this we discussed with Shiat Yedei Mat L'Schon Shel Mitzvahs. But in any case, the Rambam does believe that these mitzvahs, it's obvious from the fact that there's Ikrim, and the place where he says it clearest isn't the Yidgam Ikrim and Parash HaMishnah. But the more clear thing is that these mitzvahs, not only are there such mitzvahs, that there's really they're the more basic mitzvahs, right? We said not more important, but more basic. Because you can say everything is important, but some things are more basic, or some things are the yisod for something else, or some things are the premise for something else, or something are the achana for something else, or something are the tachlis for something else. There's all ways of saying how they're more basic. And in that sense, these mitzvahs that are included in Sefer Hamada are both the premises for everything else. Like you say usually, Yisodah Torah is like if you don't have a God and there's no nevuah, then nothing else works. But also the goal of everything else. And that's interestingly more true for Hilchos Deis and Hilchos Tshuva, that are not really so much the premise, they're more of the goal of many mitzvahs, or maybe of a lot of the mitzvahs, or almost all of them. So that's another thing. So that's the Rambam we discussed last week, Bariches, how like his whole Torah becomes like a tree, where there's like a ikir and there's anafim. And the Rambam says this explicitly also in his letter in the Yitzchok HaMeisim, where it says that once I wrote a book of halacha, I can't write only about the perutei halacha, the anufei halacha, I can't without the ikar. That would be like talking about the branches of a tree without the trunk of a tree, which doesn't make sense. So that's a whole third level of thing about how this book turns into not only like a mitzvah or not only an important thing, it turns into the mitzvah in some sense. And not only that, in some sense, it turns out that all the other sfarim or all the other mitzvahs are like pirushim. Well, not pirushim, they're more like etzes. That's the Rambam's language, what the Zohar likes. They're all like hachatimtzes, ways to get to these mitzvahs. And the most clear, like I said, we should read it inside, but because it's going to help us explain the rest. But the most clear way the Rambam says it in Moreh Nevuchim and Chelek Gimel and Perek Chuf something, it says like it's nakdomas to Tamei Mitzvahs. It says that the kavanah klal haTorah shnei dvarim. Very basic Rambam that everything is based on this. The Torah has two goals, which are tikkun hanefesh and tikkun haguf, and he calls them 2 shleimus and 2 perfections. One higher than the other one. There's the first one, the second one, but the first and the second are different depending on if you count on the level of importance or on the level of education, right? So on the level of education, the tikkun haguf is first, because if you, like it says in Hilchos Deis, very like even literally tikkun haguf. Tikkun haguf means both literally, like you have to be healthy, like it says in Hilchos Deis, because if you're not healthy, you can't do anything. So nothing starts otherwise. That's like the first perfection, and includes also tikkun hamidas, which is tikkun chevra. You need to have a society. If everyone is stealing, they're not going to have time to learn and anything like that. You can be busy watching your stuff all the time. And that's the all tikkun haguf, the first perfection. So in the seder of in life, a human life, or human like progress of life, it's first. And that leads to the second perfection, which is shleimus hadas, which is right, theoretical perfection, not practical perfection. It's knowing the truths, which is knowing God, and everything else, and everything that God made, which is everything else. So that's the second one, and of course the second one is really much more important. It's like the goal of the first one, and you could say it's like the basis, but there's like this difference. That's why I kept on saying like the Torah, in some sense, is based on that. You could say the Torah is like if there's a God, or because you know there's a God, then you can have a Torah. But it's really also the other way around, that if you do the Torah, then you can have a God. That's really more like what the Torah says. Anyways, if you have tikkun hamidas, if you have, and then the Rambam says that basically, and this is the clueless of Tamei Mitzvos, right? The Tamei Mitzvos also there's 14 categories, different categories than the 14 books, but there's 14 categories, and basically, like in the end of the day, every mitzvah is going to fit into one of these two, and he says that this is basically what Chazal call benadin lamakim and benadin lachavayra, But then lemaka meaning taken on the nefesh, and ben lechavera, and like that's a categorization for all the mitzvahs, or almost all the mitzvahs, or one way of thinking of all the mitzvahs. So therefore, what am I saying? Therefore, and now this is something interesting, and I'm going to read it inside in Sefer in Ilchis. So that's like the Akdama, the most theoretical basic Akdama for Tamei Mitzvahs. And therefore, now it's interesting. Now this turns out, I didn't talk about this last week, but now it turns out, now this is like the new things. Now it turns out, once we understand this is the most basic thing. So let's chazar it again. There's what the shlemus number one is tikkun agif and tikkun amidas and tikkun achevra. Those are three things included under tikkun agif. First perfection, and the second thing is tikkun adas. Okay, now, if you think, and we said that these things are the goals. Let's say the goals, okay, and at least in the sedra, so it's a difference. Like mitzad, so mitzad the emes, you could always say if the reason for keeping Shabbos, let's say, is knowing that chiddush olam mechvez, so the chiddush olam is more important than keeping Shabbos. Mitzad, like the truth, like if you think of, if Aristotle calls this the order of nature and the order of, I forgot the other one. Learning or something like that. What? He always talks about this, how like in nature the klal is before the prat, but in learning we learn from the prat to the klal and so on. So order of learning, something like that. In any case, in the mitzad the emes, the mitsvos Hashem is more important, is more basic, is first before everything else. But mitzad olam hazeh, so the way of people getting to that is going to be other things like bidakdama, or the way to get there, right? Now,
you do need the first. You do need the way of the knowledge before you know before the way of the knowing.
Okay, so now this is the thing that we talked about. That there's a paradox here, because in order to start keeping Shabbos, you have to know there's a God, and Shabbos is made to teach you that there's a God. So how does it start? Now, right? This is basically the problem that we discussed in the end of the class last week. And this is basically leads us to the same problem of the first four chapters of Hilchos Torah, which is like the first thing. The Rambam says this is the first thing you should learn, right? You go to Cheder, according to the Rambam's Cheder, you go, they teach you. The Bible said there's a God, and he's called Mechiv HaMetzias, and he's one, and that means he's not separable, and all kind of things like that.
It is good as an educational theory, because then you have some kind of trajectory towards which you're...
Yeah, but I told you there's a problem, which is that the beginning of education is also the end, right? Meaning, we teach you, if you're go to Cheder, the Rambam's Cheder, if you're a ger that comes to the Rambam's Gairim school, the first thing he teaches you is Achtas Hashem. And then he tells you, okay, therefore, since this is how we build it, now that you know there's the Achtas Hashem, listen, this Achtas Hashem, there's also Nevuah, and he gave you a Torah, and therefore you should do the Torah. And then you ask him, okay, why did he give me the Torah? So basically, you start from Perek Aleph, he said the Torah, and then he's like the whole Torah, and then you go all the way to the end, and you say, and what's all of this for? And it's literally in the end of the book, right? The end of.
The idea is that should slowly become apparent, like through if you have the framework or the general principle, like even in school you learn that this is we're about to study division, which is what happens when you about to study addition, which is what happens when you add things. Well, what's adding things? Well, 1 + 1 = 2.
Yes, but there's it's true that you teach this way also. But it also, what it means is that it's not really when the first time you learn it, right? If someone tells you, we say that there's a difference between learning in the sense of acceptance, of taqlid, right, of acceptance on authority, and then learning in the sense of understanding, right? In the sense of understanding, is you're always going to, in the end, is going to be the beginning where you started off. Because if your teacher, which theoretically already knows everything, is going to tell you exactly, so we have all these solutions which we discussed. They somewhat help and somewhat hurt, but that's just where we are. Yeah. Anyways, why am I saying this? So no, what's interesting here is that so we start off with saying these like most basic things, and then this is like the most funny thing in the Rambam, right? And he starts off with telling you this, and then he tells you, well, there's God, and then the God has 10 maluchim, and there's the rest of the life and everything else. And then you come to the end and he tells you, well, you didn't understand anything I just told you. This is Master Beresh, this is Master Merkava. Don't study it, only study it after to read the rest of the Rambam. I'm like, okay, so why did you put it at the end? Why did you put it at the beginning? Well, I put it at the beginning because it's the most important thing. Because if you don't know this, like you say, if you don't have believe in God, then nothing starts. But you can't know God without doing the whole Seder. And the whole Seder means not only knowledge, right? There's also, by the way, that's interesting because that's not really included. It's a whole different discussion because you have to have also like intellectual akdumas, which are not necessarily included in doing all the mitzvahs, but you have to at least have the moral or the how do you call it, social and moral education, which is also definitely a condition. So I say, when you'll finish, you'll listen to the whole Torah, then you'll come back to me and I'll explain you what the Torah was. So there's like a circle. But what is interesting, and let's go back to and now the interesting thing is that all of this fits into this Tareg Mitzvos in the Rambam. It's meaning like this. So we say that there's one mitzvah, so the actual knowledge is a mitzvah by itself. One of the interesting things, which Rav Kreskas wasn't happy with, because it doesn't make sense to have a mitzvah to believe in God, because who's the person that tells you the mitzvah? I don't think the Rambam was worried by this, because it's a mitzvah, because it's like one of the basic facts about the world. Like, does it technically work as a mitzvah? But the important thing is that there is a mitzvah like that. And then there's two other levels of mitzvahs. That's what I'm trying to get at. So in Sefer Hamada, there's not only one mitzvah. It's not only the mitzvah of like the actual mitzvah of knowledge, which is maybe the first two mitzvahs, Mitzvos Hashem, maybe three mitzvahs. I don't think more than one or two mitzvahs really fit into the like ultimate knowledge definition. And sometimes the Rambam says, you said that there are two things, knowing that there's God and there's no other God. Nothing, Mitsvos and halachos. That's the basic two mitzvahs that really exist. But the thing is that you remember that this itself has levels of getting to it, right? So in order to, if we start from the other way around, you could say also, you could say it in two steps, right? And this is really two things, and it's actually interesting when I'm thinking about like this. So what I'm trying to explain now basically is like this. Okay, so let's say you have to know these things. So we should have two mitzvahs. Maybe the first 4 chapters, that's all the knowledge in the world, if nachik luli. And then what's the rest of Sefer Hamada doing? That's really the question of today's shir. Now that we know that we have to have a Sefer Hamada, the question is, why is it so long? By the way, this is a question on all. They have on the whole Rambam. I think the whole Rambam is way too long. He has too many prutim. The Rambam is always too long. That's also Rav Kreskas' question, by the way, in Zagdama. The Rambam is always too long. Because if the Rambam, but I'm not going to get into this, but it's not, I have a different answer, then maybe I don't think it connects. It's always too long. You think that the Rambam is very bekitzer, but it's really way too long. Why? I'm telling you this very chagav. Because the Rambam is lechoira, so it depends how you read the Rambam. If it's like a Mishnah Berurah, like you should know what to do, then you have to bring all the protei halachas that he brings in every halacha and so on. But if you're taking the first example, right? There's a Sefer Hamada has Hilchas Tefillah, right? So now Hilchas Tefillah, it's like this. You could be like learn the whole Masechtas Brachas and the whole Masechtas Megillah, whatever it talks about Hilchas Tefillah and the Gemara, and you'll know everything there is to know about Tefillah from Shas, okay? And the Rambam comes and says, well, that's way too much, right? You're not going to figure it out. It's too complicated. It's too many machlokas, and let's simplify it, right? So he goes. So what, if according to me, what should have done was say like this. And the Rambam does this in Tefillah. Is a good example because he actually does this in the beginning of Tefillah. He says, well, there's such a thing as Tefillah, and Tefillah means Haidoyev Avakosha, basically, and thanking God for everything and asking Him for everything and so on, and sure, and that's a Tefillah. Now, basically, the rest is just follows from that, right? And you could say, like, okay, so if it's Shabbos, you have to talk about, you have to tefillah about Shabbos, and if you have a Zazach, you have to have Tanis, you have to have Tefillah Tanis, and if all these halachas, they're not really telling us anything new. If you understand the logic. Now, you can even say, like, you can even say that, in some sense, the Rambam does this, right? He doesn't say, he actually does. He does. Not only doesn't, he even writes Nisach Tefillah into his Sefer, right? It's that kedekach, so in that sense, like, it's literally a Siddur. And you say, well, do you mean the Rambam for me Siddur? Why can't I make my own Siddur based on the principles that it says in the Rambam? And it's not Ma'akiv to say the Nisach HaSiddur. I mean, actually the Rambam does seem to think it's Ma'akiv, but that's a question. But it's like, why do you need all these details? And the same thing, Rav Kreskas takes an example of Hilchas Pesach. Okay, he says there's a halacha of B'dikas Chametz. So we know there's 3 tam in the Gemara, whatever, pass whichever one you want. And, not whichever one you want, according to Kelulim. And then, and Mukar Shem Achis B'Chametz, that's all you have to know, basically. But the Rambam doesn't do that. He brings a whole parak or more, I think 2 or 3, I don't remember. There's more than a whole parak, I think, on B'dikas Chametz, which is just like, what's a Mukar Machnis B'Chametz and what's not? Why is it in the Gaya? Like, of course, it's if you want to have like a shir, a Shabbos a good drush, you have to tell the Oiden. Then he should have also told us more things. Should have said what brush to buy to brush the chametz out, and which geniza is the kosher geniza and things like that. But he doesn't do that. He just tells you, he's telling you halachos, but a lot of the things he tells you are just details. And those details, if you understand the klal, you should be able to understand it yourself. And if you say the other side, that the Rambam is just telling you instructions practically, he's not doing that either, because he doesn't actually give you practical instructions. Sometimes the Rambam actually does both. He does both like the klal and the practical instructions. So it seems like he does want to do that also. But in any case, this is the question, and that also a lot of things that also often brings like everything that the Rambam's like goal is to bring everything that says in the Gemara. Every halach, every case that's in the Gemara, he should bring. Sometimes they forgot something, sometimes there's the Shmutz and Rambam, we don't know, and this goal is a very funny goal. Like why? It's like if his goal was to give us a Tareg Mitzvos, the Klulim, right? The Torah Sheba'al Peh, the whole Torah Sheba'al Peh. So of course, so therefore every psak that anyone in the times of the Talmud, every paskin is important. Like it's a question that happened in the times of Rav Ashi, and they had a question and they had the answer. I'm not saying it's not nice to know, but it's just making your book longer, and it's not clear what you were getting out of it. You could always say, we learn from this, from the next case, and a lot of times this case things, there's even a lot of halachos that are not Nagaya anymore. So if it's Ilchas LaMashiach, I understand. Mashiach can't be Nagaya, but some things is like never going to be Nagaya again. So why is it in the Rambam? Like Bisman Chazal, there was a Chves, and the Rambam sometimes says this, and the Rambam sometimes tells this, and Bismanenu, you should use the same klal. So why don't you just say the klal and not give us all the details? Anyway, but generally, I think the Rambam is way too. Even these people have like a 1-volume Rambam. It's still way too long. The whole book could be like a 10th of the size. Anyways, and then why am I saying this? Because in Hilchos Hamada they have the same kind of a question, right? And it has to do with the same thing, like because he wants to put it into the Torah. He doesn't want to just say like, well, there's Torah and there's also my drushas, my Yunei Das, my philosophy that I believe in, and I'm going to somehow stick it in. He wants to very much. It becomes literally a parish inside the Torah, like this whole structure that we discussed. How there's 2 levels and all these things. They're all mitzvahs and they're all halachos of certain mitzvahs. Nothing is outside of a mitzvah. There's nothing in the Rambam that's not a mitzvah or a parish of a certain mitzvah. Like even people often have this kasha on the Rambam that he says like, that Masa Beresh, the Masa Makuvah is physics, similar to physics. And people say, okay, so how's that Torah? And the answer is according to the Rambam. I think the Ragachover says this teretz, but I think it's obvious from if you learn Rambam. The answer is that's Hilchas Ahavas Hashem. Just like there's one small mitzvah of having Pesach, okay, there's 10 mitzvahs or whatever, and they have a whole Masechtas Pesachim, it's very long. And we're just saying the Torah, all these details. It's if you work out, there's Torah Shel Peh, there's working out, all the details. Then there's mitzvah Ahavas Hashem. The Rambam says Ahavas Hashem means to understand Hashem's creation. So now all of science is Kiyam Mitzvah Hilchas Ahavas Hashem. Now, why is it? Do you make a Richas HaTorah? Why is this? We get into like side questions. But the point is, it's Lamdish. That's what it is. At least if you learn Rambam, it's Hilchas Ahavas Hashem. Just like Hilchas Kiddush HaChodesh is a special mitzvah of the Chashuv Tkufas. So the Rambam doesn't count it as mitzvah. I remember, but it's like a mitzvah, and it's a mitzvah. So welche mitzvah is mitzvahs Kiddush HaChodesh. Anyways, and this is like an important thing for the Rambam. He wants everything to be a mitzvah. He doesn't want like have like philosophy separate from the Torah and things like that. So Bekitzer, so we have this question. I'm saying you the answer before the question, but the question is, why does Sefer Hamada have all the other halachos? Another sense, another way of asking the same question was something like this. By the way, the teretz for this is beferish, and more than I'm not making stuff up. If you say that there's, like we said, there's roots and branches, right? There's Shirusha Torah and there's Prutim, Anufim, Hechatim, says way to get there, or things that come out of it. So then, l'choyre the Shirushim are Metzias Hashem, V'yichad Hashem. Maybe you could say, like some things you could say, okay, maybe all the Yidgam Ikrim, I'm not even sure. But interestingly, the Sefer Hamada doesn't work in the order of Yidgam Ikrim. Doesn't even mention it ever, like the number 13. It mentions most of the things that say in Yidgam Ikrim, but doesn't ever like work with that. What? In Nachas Tshuva, there's 12 or 4, there's 13, but different 13. Anyways, he doesn't say the number. It doesn't make a difference. But I'm just saying, it's not like if he would have done that, he would have said that I have my list of Ikrim, and therefore this is the first thing I'm going to tell you. Okay, it would make sense. But it makes it a lot more complicated and has to do with the thing of mitzvahs. Because the Ikram is not worried about mitzvahs. He's just telling you facts. He has psukim for some of them, and some of them they're psukim on mitzvahs also, but it's not like the point. And here it's mitzvahs. And suddenly, actually very weirdly, the actual things of Dilgam Ikram are in the beginning and the end of Sefer Hamada. So let's say the whole Hilchas Torah, also the only beginning and the end, because in the middle there's Hilchas Kiddush Hashem and Hilchas Mechikas Hashem. Sort of random halachas, not random, but like not the Yisodis, just halachas. And so if you think about it, like most of the ikrim are in Hilchas Torah and Hilchas Tshuva, and then in between you have Dayas Talmud Torah and Avodah Zarah. I'm just see here, and they're not Yisodis. You can say Hilchas Avodah Zarah is like there's a fifth ikrim maybe, but most of it is halachas. It's not the explanation of the Yisodis or anything like that. So that's the question. Like, what is all these things doing? And another way of saying it is, okay, I could answer the question and say, okay, but these are like prutim. Like if someone would say something like this. By the way, this is an interesting question because of some of the halachos that are included here. Maybe this not really needed an answer for that. But like Hilchas Torah is like the funniest halacha, like First 4 chapters are Kabbalah, whatever, metaphysics. And then Perek Kai is Hilchos Kiddush Hashem. And Perek Vav is Hilchos Mechikas Hashem, if I remember, like Hashem is Shannon and Mechukim. And then Perek Zayin is like Lahamash Yesh Nevuah. And like all the Lamdash Esfurim like have Hilchos Torah only on 2 Perukim. And the rest of them they don't learn because it's not Nagaya. So like, it's very funny. Like Perek Kai Vav, that's their Noisa. And then that's Halacha, the Sugyas, there's Pupilim, Yorik Val Yav, and how does it work? And it's like very funny, like how so again, you could say, so someone could say the answer is, of course, the Mitzvos Hashem and the Mizal Kavod Hashem is a Prat, the Mitzvos Hashem somehow, right? But then I could tell you, okay, what about Hilchos Shabbos? Isn't Hilchos Shabbos also a Prat, the Mitzvos Hashem somehow? And isn't Hilchos Lulav also? Man, everything is a Prat, the Mitzvos Hashem in some way. So what we have to find is, to understand the basic definition of what Sefer Hamada is for, we have to find this middle step. Like how does this whole list of 75 mitzvahs, which are not, of course, all mitzvahs are in some way or into or out of Mitzvos Hashem, but they're somehow one step more removed than all these mitzvahs that are in Sefer Hamada. Does it make sense, my quest? That's the quest for understanding all these mitzvahs, or all these halachos.
But in what sense are they? Are they thicker branches?
Yeah, they're like the basic branches and then the second level branches. That's how we sort of have to understand it. So, like in some sense, everything that's in Sefer Hamada is the Yisod HaTorah. That's what the definition in the beginning is. It says, "Hamitzvah shen ikar das Moshe Rabbeinu v'tzurich adam ledes tchilas hakol." Then it gives examples, which are only 2 of the 75 mitzvahs. Like what were the other 73? Like Kigoyin. Okay, I understand that Kigoyin. Yichad Shemoy v'Isar v'Tzura. It makes sense. If you would tell me these are the 2 Yisodas, that makes sense. But what about the rest? Right? And of course, I'm a maskim that those are maybe more basic. So let's put them at level 1. And then the rest of Sefer Hamada is level 2, and the rest of the Sefer is level 3, or 4, or 5, I don't know. So, I think that the answer says in this shtickle, in Maimonides Chelik Gimel Perek Lamed, that's the second piece, and I think I should read it, so we'll find out the answer. So it says like this. So again, in Hilchos, in Perek Chelik Gimel, in the part of Tamei Mitzvahs, this is like the beginning, one of the beginnings of Tamei Mitzvahs. So the first thing he does is he divides the mitzvahs to 14 klulim. And this is one of my proofs that the Rambam loved the number 14, because there is the second time or the third time that he divided the mitzvahs into 14 klulim, and they're not the same. If they'd be the same, you could say, okay, you figured it out, that's how much it came out to. But they're not the same, but they turned out somehow to be 14 also. Okay, so 14 is a sod. But anyways, and now I'm going to read the first 3, because the first 3 are the ones that are in this book. So again, you see, interestingly, so it's again a disproportion, right? Just like the mitzvahs have 600 and 75 of them are in the first one, there's also 14 general branches. So this makes sense, because like if you organize according to different reasonings, you get into different ways of categorizing it, right? Like in the Sefer Hamada, Mishnah Torah is organized according to halachos, so you get the 14 in one way. Here it's organized according to the Talmud. It doesn't have to correspond entirely to the way the halachos are organized. But also you see the same interesting thing, that 3 out of the 14 are in the first book. So it's a very large, it's a big bechar. This has a lot of Pishnai and Pishloisha. It has the first Sefer Hamada. It says like this. So it says like this. The first klal is mitzvahs. I don't remember which translation this is. A mitzvah shem deis shorshes. I think this is even Divan. Okay, so deis shorshes, and this is Hilchos Yisod HaTorah. Okay, Hilchos Yisod HaTorah is, so this makes sense. This is the truth. Deis shorshes means root truths, right? Root opinions, truths, knowledge. Okay, and then he gives us a small thing. He says you should know that tshuva and tanis are part of this. Because this is basically our answer, is what I said before, that the real Yisodis, like if you ask the Rambam, like Yidgom Ikram are Hilchos Tshuva and are Hilchos Yisod HaTorah. Tanis is just a prat in Hilchos Tshuva, if you think about it, because Tanis Alatzur is mentioned in Hilchos Tshuva also, and the Hilchos Tanis are in Sefer Zmanim, but the reason for them is basically it's a kind of Tshuva. That's what it says in the fifth perek, right? Everyone knows the Akdama of Hilchos Tanis, the whole drusha with the Keri and stuff. It's basically a prat in Hilchos Tshuva. And it's even mentioned, I think, in Hilchos Tshuva. But okay, there's more halachos, so you understand that's another level. But in any case, that's the first klal. And then the Rambam says, this is right, and that's why I underlined it. If you ask me, like, what the reason is, why should I know the truth? That question, but actually it says 2 things. It says truth and useful. Why should I know true or useful things, or and useful things, or and useful things? This is the whole question of necessary truth. You don't ask that question, right? Because that's what it says because that's the end, right? Knowing truth it's not for something. Everything else is for that. That's the goal. That's Lashma, right? That's the whole thing. point is, so I don't have, in other words, but this becomes very interesting later, right? Because in other words, the Rambam says the first class, this is in other words, this is the most simple thing. If I find a mitzvah that I can explain you, right? Of course, if the mitzvah is literally this, the mitzvah says no, Shashem Elikim, or whatever, Shema Yisrael Hashem Echad, and then you ask me, what's the time of this mitzvah? Then you're not making any sense. Because this mitzvah is the time. And it's not only that, I could even go further and I could say, if you ask me what's the time of a different mitzvah, and I said the time of this mitzvah is Shema Yisrael Hashem Echad, then I explained it. Because I don't have to go further from that. This is the reason. Right? So that's simple, okay? Then he says like this, very interesting, but this is a very interesting thing about halachos avodah zarah. Okay, and he doesn't explain. In the next parak, he's going to explain how tshuva and tanis are connected to the deis sharshiyos. But meanwhile, if it's a basic daya, if it's a basic truth, either if it's something that's just true because it's true, or even if something that it's true because it's useful, like tshuva, for example, it doesn't say that it's true because it's true; it says it's true because it's useful. And of course, there's other things like schar va'inish that I might think are mostly useful more than true. But anyways, but even useful means that it leads you to knowing truth. So useful is just another step of truth, in that sense, or it leads you to good actions, which then lead you to truth. Whatever it is, maybe 3 steps beyond. But the point is, those are obvious things. Now, the second klal, the second great category of mitzvahs is Isser avodah zarah. Ha-mitzvahs ha-nitla is Isser avodah zarah. And these are the mitzvahs of halachos avodah zarah. And then, just like he did in the first category, he says there's some mitzvahs that you wouldn't think are halachos avodah zarah, and these are actually not counted in halachos avodah zarah, but they're also really part of halachos avodah zarah, which is kilayim, kilei begodim v'arla, kilei kerem, kilayim and arla. And he's going to explain that. That's because of the Rambam's theory that kilayim is some minhag that avodah zarah did. And therefore, it's really only also like another. And the some mitzvahs, it's very. This is another interesting thing. Just saying before, like tshuva, he puts in the Sefer Hamada, and for this reason, because it's part of one of the truths that he has to know. And tanis doesn't. Like I said, maybe it's mentioned, but hilchas tanis is just in Sefer Zmanim, like in the Mishnah. There's Mesechtes tanis and Seder Moed. And the same thing is true for halachos avodah zarah. Like the Rambam put in a whole bunch of random stuff in halachos avodah zarah, especially in the end. I have the whole list over here. At the end of halachos avodah zarah has things like ksoives kaka, payas. It literally says halachos avodah zarah. Because of the Rambam's theory that payas is for the avodah zarah is to do it, but kilayim he didn't, because kilayim is roim. Like come on, maybe that's the time, but it's hilchas roim. So it's there not for the reason of the time. It's there for the reason of like it's something that you do with the things that you plan. So it belongs in Sefer's roim, but it doesn't. What? Yeah. Kilayim is also in yeah. So that's why he has to say it, because everything that's halachos avodah zarah, you just have to look there, and then but these are things that he didn't actually put in, because his book, like it's interesting, like some of the things he did, like according to the time he put it into halachos avodah zarah, and some things like he couldn't. I don't know why. Maybe there's some reasoning here. What's the kind of difference to how connected it is actually? Like maybe you could say some. I don't know. Like payas of a payas erosh nezokin is maybe it's. I sort of think that no, where else could he put it? Like there should be where's hilchas payas belong? Where's it go? In some Sechtes Markes, my shayches, just because it's a laugh. But where does it belong? In Yeridaya, okay. Well, like where? I mean, the only place for the Rambam to put it is in halachos avodah zarah. So kilayim, there's like this huge category of zeroim. It's not like we need to look where to put it. There's thousands of mitzvot, like thousands of halachos in zeroim. So this is one of them. Okay, it happened to be that some of them have reasons, like most of zeroim is probably he's going to explain how to do his matnas aniyim, has to do with the kanim, makes matnas kena, and this one is a separate time. It's avodah zarah, but that's probably the reason. Anyways, that's the second class. So that's interesting, but by the way, this is very important. Because I never gave this sheet here clearly, but because according to the Rambam, there's a very big difference between deis hamitis and Isser avodah zarah. They're not the same thing. And it says like this: V'siba zeh klal gam ken yido. So this is of course a klal I don't really have to justify, but it says something different than before. Why? Pnei shi la'amus hadeis hamitiyos v'la'ashiram lenetzach behamoin. Okay, so this is a very important thing of the Rambam in halachos avodah zarah, and maybe we'll do a class only in halachos avodah zarah to talk about this. That the Rambam believes, that's how I understand and. A lot of things. People we think like this, and you could notice. I'll give you a good way to notice this. Usually we think that there's the true emuna, like mitsvos achdas Hashem or yichud Hashem or mitsvos Hashem, and the opposite of that is the avodah zarah, which doesn't believe in the right God or believes in a different God or something like that. Now in the Rambam, you'll notice that two things. The opposite of believing in a God is to be an atheist, and the opposite of believing in the right God is to believe in a different God. So like Mitzvos Hashem should have a, if you think the way we think usually, I think it would make sense that Hilchos Seder Torah should start like this. There should be a mitzvah of Mitzvos Hashem, and then a loisase for not believing Mitzvos Hashem, for being an atheist. And then there should be a mitzvah of Yichud Hashem, the only God, and there should be a loisase for someone who believes different gods. Make sense? Isn't that how it should be?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure the first one is.
Okay, you're too smart. But Lamala mentioned I always used to think that this is how it should be, and I was very upset that it's not like this. Because in the Rambam, it doesn't work like this. There is no mitzvah to not believe in God. Amazingly. There isn't any mitzvah to not believe in God. You're not over. If you're an atheist, you're not over in any avodah according to the Rambam. Maybe it's because of Peskas' problem. But it doesn't say anywhere you're not allowed. It does say, but it says the wrong thing. If you look in the beginning of Sefer Hamada, it says, if you look in, I don't have it here, but if you look, you should take the Rambam, you'll see. If you look in the beginning of Hilchos Seder Torah, it says, the first 4 halachos, it says, you should believe in God. And if you think there's a different God, you're over on the Elohim Acharim. It never says which avodah is to be an atheist. Maybe it's not an avodah. Maybe it's a mitzvah. Nicht kein avodah. You're over on the mitzvah essay. It's a bit less essay. It's not a lois essay. It's a bit less essay. Okay. It's only you did tshuva for 1 second. You don't even have to wait for Yom Kippur even. Like click up. It's a small affair. No, the way and then there's the Yichud Hashem, and there isn't any lois against that. The Hilchos Avodah is a din in avodah. It's not a din in belief. There is the Rambam does try to have in belief a mamish shesh b'avodah zera mamish is over on leil chalim acher. That's like the first places in Hilchos Avodah if I remember. The point is that according to the Rambam, and this is not really connected with what I just said, but the teretz is like this: that the Rambam understands that there's no 2 gods. The count doesn't even make sense. There's the one God and the other God that's like fighting who is the correct God. It doesn't even make sense. There's only one God by definition. So therefore, it doesn't even make sense to say that Avodah is worshiping a different God. That doesn't add up. So Elamai Avodah is basically being an atheist. But how you being? There's a very fancy way of being an atheist. If the Mala atheist just says there's no gods, and Avodah says something that's not a god is a god, it's basically saying that the one God doesn't exist. Because that's so Avodah, the real Avodah, that's why Avodah Rambam. My God, the real Avodah is an atheist.
One involves attribution and the other one doesn't, right?
One involves
attribution, right? You're saying that something isn't what it is, and the other ones you're saying that something. The basic thing, right? But the basic, I know. There's a shtickle about this in Perek something and about different kind of mistakes. I know, but the basic point is the problem is that the way that he assumes always is that everyone agrees that there's a hierarchy, like there's causes. If you think there's no causes, you're a kalam, and then you believe in God, you're stam confused. But besides for that, everyone has causes. So therefore, the only question is how far the chain of causes goes. So stopping anywhere is just saying that that's the God. Enough to the attribution is only in language. Right, but it's not.
It's only like saying this is the God. What does it mean? This is the God. It's just saying that the causality stops there.
It's an act of substitution, right?
Right. But if you think about it,
attribution with that substitution, right? You assume that thing contains. That
yes, complicated, and it's complicated. How he has a toilet. I can't get into this problem. This is a problem of the basic problem of how you could have a mistake and how mistakes in theology could even work. And how there could be Avodah. I have a whole sheet about this in Perek Knian Zayin or Ches. I don't remember. One of those program we talked about Shlis Atarim is about this. Or Nentes, I don't remember. Point is, I understand. Point is, what I'm trying to get at is something like this. So what Ram understands is that the basic thing. So in other words, there's no anti-Avodah in the Torah. That's the important thing. It's not like you have to believe in God and be against the other guy. There's no being against. There's no one to be against. What there is to believe in God. That's all there is. So now what's Hilchos Avodah? So then the Rambam literally says in the beginning of Hilchos Avodah that the problem starts with people. That's why he has this very interesting story. Avodah doesn't start with denying with having a different God. It starts with having the Darenesh, right? The whole story of the people that are like, of course there's a God, but for some reason he doesn't explain over there. You should worship other things that are not God, right? And what's wrong with that? What's wrong? What's it saying? Maybe some people, the Rambam usually think it's just false. It's not true, but it's not really false. Of course, the stars do have power. Maybe not. Maybe it doesn't exactly work this good that you're doing. Okay, but it's true. So what's wrong? He doesn't explain what. But I think he does explain what. He says before. What's wrong is that this leads to atheism. So the Zura, according to me, is Pshat in the Rambam, is a Gzaira uti atheism. Why? Because the Rambam explains. When, especially for the Amoin Am. So if you're a very smart person, theoretically, you could always be avoid the Zura, and nothing wrong will happen, because you'll still know that there's one God, just the Teva and whatever, just like we do natural things. It's not really different, just so supernatural. Everyone is moed that you're allowed to do ishtadlis, you're allowed to do natural things, you're allowed to believe in causes that are not God, right? Only the Chassidim are not allowed to believe in causes that are not God. But the Rambam officially believes in causes that are not God. The Kalam, whatever, but everyone else believes in causes that are not God. Elamai, there's a whole sibus. So what's the problem? So the Rambam explains, and I think it's beferish, but I think that this is the pshat, that the problem is that since most people don't understand abstract things, most people don't understand that, that we're lamas, that we're looking, if you go to the Yitzchok house, you go to the temple, and you see this picture, you see this image, you see this statue, and you worship it, and you say, Baruch Atu Hashem, but we don't really mean it, we mean the Hashra of Hashem. This is schon teures. And I'm not verstanden nicht teures. A normal person, says the Rambam Meferish in over there, the Eina Hamoin Makirim Elet Tziris Atzlamim. The Hamoin doesn't understand anything beyond what they can see. So if you pick them a big picture, and the picture that you tell them to worship is not God, some other cause, it's a picture of the other cause, it's not even the other cause, it's two levels. What's the chilik? It's not God. At some point, but in the minority you don't worship. But if you say that you worship it, and at some point, people are going to forget about the first cause. And that's how, according to his history, that's what happened. Because the first generation of the Tzura, they knew about God. At some point they forgot. It's not even clear if even the smart of the Tzura know about God. Because maybe at some point they mamish forget. So, in other words, when you make an ikr of something that's a tuffle, at some day it becomes an ikr. And then the ikr gets forgotten. So the problem is not the etzem of the Tzura is not a problem. The etzem of the Tzura, the tam, nothing halacha. The tam of Isra of the Tzura is that it causes people to forget the first cause. That's the Rambam's understanding. So that's what it says here, that halachos of the Tzura is not
lit. It stops them from aspiring to it, right? From an educational standpoint.
So in other words, ganz halachos of the Tzura is din in education, not a din in truth. When you believe in Avodah Zura, you're not believing a lie, you're believing something harmful. Well, believing is a weird word. When you're worshipping, I don't know what believing exactly means. But if you oiv Avodah Zura, whatever that means, you give them. It really means something like giving them honor due to gods. There's some kind of cover that belong onto God, like dal davodas, which are even those are complicated. But like karm is something that belongs only to a god. Everyone is moida. Like this is kilal moida. Kavunas are only for gods. People don't get kavunas; they get gifts, not kavunas. What's the difference? I don't know. Somehow there's a difference. But this is a concept that all humans have. Like this, the Greeks talk about the honors due to gods. Like it's do as a level of cover that only God gets. And if you do this level of cover for something that's not God, even if you have a good excuse, at some point you forget God. And therefore, Hilchos Avodah Zura is a din in Pirsim. It's a din in Kiddush Hashem. It's a din in what he says here. Amas hadeyes hamitiyos lashirim lanetzach behamoin. So it's very important. That's why it's so important. By the Rambam Avram Avinu, this whole kidat of the man sheitzav as bunav. So the fact that Avram Avinu knew God. A lot of people know God. There was Mechanoich, Meseshelach, but Avram Avinu was also Mechadish Isra Avodah Zura. That's the big thing that he was Mechadish. Because before that, everyone didn't have Avodah Zura. And then there were a few Chachom that knew about God. They didn't have a problem. They know most people have these middle things, and we know about the God. So they get. But Avram Avinu thought, okay, and they even taught. The Rambam says this in Perek in two places, and they even taught their friends. They had Mizashelach, had Chassidim also, and Shem Va'ever, whatever. They all had Chassidim. They taught them about the one God. But what they didn't realize is that if you care about your children, you have to also make Yisra Avodah Zura. And Ravini was the first one that figured out that's not enough to teach about the God. That's very nice for you or for the people, for your Talmidim. But for your children, in other words, the women and children, the Hamoin, right, that says here, the Hoi Paloi, they're never going to stay with this, at least a few generations past, unless you make Yisra Avodah Zura. So the Yisra Avodah Zura is a shmira for the Hamoin remembering Metzias Hashem. So this is actually very interesting because it turns out that even Yisra Avodah Zura is very secondary to Metzias Hashem. So it's not really. In other words, I often had a question like this: the Chayra the Rambam is backwards because Hilchos Avodah Zura at least should be the second thing. There should be Yisod Torah and Hilchos Avodah Zura. And the Rambam doesn't do that. He has before Hilchos Avodah Zura is like Hilchos Talmud Torah, which is totally random. Hilchos Talmud Torah. Like and then there's a Cheshuva. Like what's the say there? The Chayra, the Rambam himself always says Metzias Hashem Avodah Zura. Okay, so that should be the first two halachos at least. Why does it take 3 times? But if you understand, according to the Rambam, Hilchos Avodah Zura is not really the most basic thing. The most basic thing is Metzias Hashem, and we'll talk about that as Talmud Torah. But the most basic thing is Metzias Hashem. Avodah Zura is mostly the tactics. It's a tactic thing. The tactic of making sure that people don't forget about Hashem. That's why, okay, Bekitzer, that's why a lot of things. You can make a lot of maskunas lalucha about this. Because it's not pshat, the Avaida of V'dzur is not dealing of different God. The Avaida is making more important something that, okay, this is the tam, making more important something that's not the ultimate importantest thing. Right? Because most people only see that. That's why explicitly the Rambam says that fancy excuses don't help you. In other words, even if you have a fancy excuse, right? You know that there's a one God, and you even have a whole explanation. The Rambam says over here, and the guy that says beferish, nobody ever worshipped like the psukim, the otherwise, but they all making fun. They're dealing Eitz ve'evan. The Rambam says nobody ever worshipped the Eitz ve'evan. It was all a pikabula, man. Tiefe Sachen. The Eitz is a mshucha of the koich of the koich, and the koich is a mshucha of the koich of the malach, and so on. But that doesn't save you from Isra v'Dezura, because this is precisely what Isra v'Dezura is. Lefi dasa, your wife not going to understand this difference, right? This is like if a Catholic comes and says, "Chaz v'shalom, we don't worship icons; we only venerate icons." So the teretz, according to Ram, to this is that this doesn't save you from V'Dezura. I'm not saying halacha, but theoretically, this doesn't save you because your child doesn't know the difference between veneration and worship. Nobody knows the difference. But let's say, your children definitely no, I the difference. But the push the people don't know the difference, and V'Dezura is for the language of the push the people. And therefore, we have to have all the V'Dezura, like, and the V'Dezura goes very far, right? The V'Dezura is all the way down to Chikkas Hagoy, all the way down to not dressing in the way that V'Dezura dress, or not drinking the wine that maybe, okay, by the way, that's one funny thing. For some reason. It should have been V'Dezura. That's like mamash a funny thing. It's even a Mesechta V'Dezura and the Gemara, and Rambam puts in Chachas Machal Sasir, as if it's like, no Shaykh, no Chayisef, yeah, in Esech. But in any case, it goes very far because the point of it, the reason of it goes so far is not because, it's not because it's something wrong. It's this sheker and maybe this sheker, but that's the sheker is it's wrong because the whole ma'amatz, the whole thing of V'Dezura is that we need to make a lot of propaganda around Metzias Hashem and a lot of anti-propaganda against things that make it go wrong. Because otherwise you end up, and the Rambam even thinks that Takshama is a kind of V'Dezura, and it didn't even help. Most Yidden are Magashim, according to the Rambam, were. So you see how hard it is. Anyways, that's Hilchos V'Dezura. But so what's the point? So wait, I didn't answer my question. So according to this, Hilchos V'Dezura are the same as Hilchos. So what's the difference between Kili Akerem and wait? Is there anything else? So it's interesting. Hilchos V'Dezura. Is there any other things? I said Yain Nesach is a funny one. It's not it doesn't count the mitzvah in Hilchos, but it's there the halachos. Maybe it's not the deraisa. Like the deraisa would be the kroivs. We're talking about stam yanim and things like that. Is there something secondary to these kind of things? Like, is there something? What I'm trying to say is that so something like this. I'll tell you the question. The Rambam also says, right, famously, that karbonas are really lafika v'dezura somehow, right? So then, okay, so karbonas also should be in lachsa v'dezura. How far can we go with this? Like payas could be there, but not karbonas. So we're gonna say the same thing. It's like zroim because there's too much of it. All karbonas, man. I don't know. I think that more reasonably would be to say that it's next level. In other words, all the things are not V'Dezura, or at least most of them. Maybe there's one. Maybe Pais is not a good example.
It's good to plant your goal along the branches, right? That doesn't hurt either. It's good to plant your goal along the branches.
Meaning,
it just as like. Okay, so maybe Hilchos Hamada is not the best example, but to have like different things in different places that both trace back to the root in a more distinct way.
I understand, but then I'm trying to say that there's some things.
The internal logic of it, I don't know.
That they're only the second layer. Like Isra v'Dezura is still, you could still understand that. Let's assume that it's true, even though it's a very complicated thing to understand. Let's assume that it's true that all karbonas, and like okay, let's take even a specific example, a specific halacha like kol sev kol dvash lesaktire. Makes sense to say why v'shlecht. Okay, because that's the meaning of V'Dezura, and we don't do that. Something even more detailed that even makes sense of Pipshat. So then, would that belong to Hilchos V'Dezura?
It's 2 steps removed from this.
Somehow it's 2 steps removed, but V'Dezura is already 1 step removed. That's what I'm trying to say.
Oh, this is the second step removed.
How is it another step?
You're going to fall into Avodah Zarah, and then...
Well,
if you fall into Avodah Zarah, you're going to...
Right, so something...
Also that if you B'Tshich, yeah, with a certain kind of accuracy, you kind of get to the Anechi, right?
Okay, but that's already the third. That's like you're saying.
But it's a
Actually, I'm not sure if you could become. I don't know if you could get to Anachi only by the strong David. You also have to have like some positive. Like I'm not sure if Avram would only break the. He has to also explain that. Yeah, but no. But I think what he's saying is more like more sense. Like you could say, why don't we do Soivet Vash? Why don't we do Chvais Vos Noiser? I don't know, whatever, something random, and because if you do this, it's mamish like Gag al Gag. And it's like even to the extent that it becomes somewhat unreasonable as a time, but that's what we do. But if you do this, you might think that we're doing the same thing as them, and then maybe in 6 generations later somehow you're going to end up Dina Batzura, and then 6 generations later, like a lot of Doid is going to take until this. A lot of the things we do, like the guy that has very long payas, because his kids can cut a little and then a little and then a little, and at the end they'll have a payas like halacha. So like sometimes you think like 10 generations further. So 10 generations later, there's going to be a real avodah zarah, and then 10 generations after that, like a surah doiris minayach vad Avram,
Yeah, well, you see, it didn't work.
What the avodah zarah didn't work.
Yeah, they served avodah zarah anyway. That's didn't do everything.
Yeah, that's true. It makes sense. We like this is the Rambam's point and all those things. That we're spoiled. We think that avodah zarah is like an easy thing to get rid of, but actually it took 1,000 years to even get where we are. So maybe it's true, this like crazy harchaka. Yeah, anyways, but you understand that it's second level. Okay, but so that's the point. So there's mitzvahs that are directly to this. So they're the reason for the other mitzvahs. In other words, the reason for Issa Soid Vash is Isra Avodah Zarah, and the reason for Isra Avodah Zarah is Mitzvos Hashem. And I think something similar is with the third category, which is Hilchos Dayas. And that's why Hilchos Dayas is actually a very interesting mitzvah. By the way, I think that it's maybe one of the bigger chedishim of the Ram Hilchos Dayas, more than Hilchos Torah. I should probably focus more on that sometimes. The third klal, if you go back to the first page, the third klal is mitzvahs atlis b'tikkun hamidos, and that's Hilchos Dayas. That's what it says here. And it says why is that? Again, these Yedua, everyone knows that we need to have good midas in order to be mashlim chevres b'nei adam v'kibutzayim. And why do we need that? Because humans are because humans are social animals or political animals, and humans don't work by themselves unless you're like that weird yotzim maklal that goes to the midbar from Hilchos Dayas, but that's not really something that works. That I don't think it's really meant to be a realistic plan, because a person can't live in a midbar. So just saying, I don't know. But the point is, and this is obvious. Now, the interesting thing with Hilchos Dayas, I think that's very, very significant that it's a second halacha, because Hilchos Dayas are basically, again, this is the most explicit way of saying this, the first tikkun, the tikkun agif, right? So again, you could say Hilchos Yisod HaTorah and Hilchos Avodah Zarah are 2 levels of tikkun adayas, right? You have to have the correct, people have to have the correct opinions, and we have directly the correct opinions, and then we have the like big war, this like big jihad against the incorrect opinions, which goes all the way to having the right shoelaces and all kind of things like that. But now the next thing, again, the first thing really in the order of education, but the second thing in the order of nature, is to have good midas, or to have good virtues, right? Why? Because this is like the way the Rambam usually says it, that this is the only way you're going to ever get to think, right? Because if you live in a messed up society, there's no yeshivas, no societies. So in order to make a yeshiva, you need to first have a police, and first a doctor, and all these things that you need to have. Well, here he's talking about, so don't wait, I have to get this. So now you have to realize there's something very interesting, because if you think about it now, again, just if this is even a bigger question, like if you think about it, then I think that, I forget always the list of the Sforim and the Rambam, but at least, okay, so forget about the last 4 books, okay, at least the last 4 books, which are the Zikim Kinyan, Mishpatim, Shoftim, are all taken achevra, at the end of the day, right? These are how to organize a society. You should have judges. You should not steal. You should have kinyonim. You should have all these things are basically have to do with that. The details, but actually here it's some more easy to understand that in order to have a functioning society, you need to have all these details. Or at least no society has yet figured out how to not have those details. So it's less laughable when you say, like, the point of all of this is that you should be able to sit and, like the reason why we have, like the US code is 30,000 pages long, like you think the Shulchan Aruch is long. It's longer, and the whole point of it, of course, is that some senators should have votes or whatever. But even if it would be less cynical, the whole point of it is that we should be able to sit here and talk for a few minutes without having other problems. That's the whole point. And for that, you need all of these thousands of laws and so on, because Otherwise, it's just re'achai below.
Like Haiti.
Yeah, exactly. That's and what's the problem with Haiti? There's no yeshivas there. Because you can't make a yeshiva. Instead, you have to stand with a gun to make sure they don't eat you. It's a big problem. So what's the nekeda? So again, it's very interesting because here it's even more interesting that the Rambam decided for some reason to make the Yesod explicit. I think that this is very interesting because this chiddush in the Rambam says, now which mitzvah is there to have good midas? V'lechte b'drachav. Okay, so there's a ma'am chazal, ma'am rachem. The Rambam decided to make this literally a mitzvah. It's like I try to tell people they should be machbar on that mitzvah. I don't know how, but it's like the second basic mitzvah in the Torah, according to the Rambam, is to be like God. It's actually interesting if you think about it as like in the sense of like there's God and His actions, and then we have to emulate His actions. So that's in a certain sense also why it's the second thing. But more based, that's a theological, like a top-down explanation. But the bottom-up explanation is that the Rambam seemed to think that it's important that people to know that not pshat that you have, maybe, I don't know why, like why do you have to have ilchas midas besides for all the Chaznish has discussion, but the Lamdish answer to Chaznish according to the Rambam is that's a mitzvah fazich. The Chaznish doesn't understand, because what does having good midas mean? You remember the minute betochen? What does not having good midas mean? Not stealing, for example. So what does not stealing mean? Choshe mishpat. You have to know what's mine, what's not yours. So it's choshe mishpat. So why do we have to have midas besides for choshe mishpat? But the Rambam would answer you something like, that this question is more or less analogous to why we have to have a mitzvah of Isra v'Dezura if we already have the Isra v'Chol. Like, these are two mitzvahs, and both levels are a mitzvah. Like, there's Hilchas Dais. Hilchas Dais says, have good midas. So there has to be Hilchas Midas, just like there's Hilchas everything else. So the Rambam has his theory. Part of the Hilchas Midas is one of the places where he keeps almost to the klal. He doesn't get into too many details. He does have a lot of extra details there too, though. But, like you should have, understand my question? Like if doesn't make sense my question? What's the point of having good midas?
Then what do you need the cloth for, right?
Yeah, a backwards question. Because I think before the Rambam this was the situation, maybe before the Chovos HaLevavos, there were little people before the Rambam that made the midas into a thing. But like, if you learn Gemara, right? Okay, if you learn Perkovas, you find a lot of things about midas. But like, why would we need to have an explicit thing about, like, the point of having good midas is not to steal, In some sense, the Rambam says this sometimes. It's a little complicated because it doesn't work for everything. There's like Madan L'Mukam style midas. But in some sense, it seems like he thinks often, I never know really the answer to this, but it seems often that he thinks that the point of having good midas is that that's how you could survive within society. Not survive, thrive, right? A good society needs people to be good people. That's sort of how he says it, because he says it says beferish once in the end of Maimonides, says the most clearly that midas are not for yourself, midas are for your wife, for other people. It says the only thing that's for yourself is chachma. That's why it says that's chachma or Torah. But midas, in the end of the day, why do you have to have good midas? So people shouldn't be mad at. So you shouldn't get into fights with people. So why shouldn't you get into fights with people? Of course, because you end up in Haiti if you get into too many fights. At the end of the day, okay. So again, this is a lot of level before. But so. And the master, we have the whole Torah, like Mishpatim Sheftim, is basically figure out not to have bad midas. So you could say something like the Rambam, like, okay, so you could be Neville Rosh Torah, so it's not enough, you need to like catch all. Like someone would say, well, I read it didn't steal, but I'm still a Chayro.
Also make sure you're making your way up the branches instead of getting all the
right, so I think that's more like you're saying. So you could say, I don't think it's really, because I don't think the Rambam even agrees, there's a whole different problem. The Rambam doesn't really agree with the Ramban over there. But it seems to be that Rambam thinks something more significant than that. That he thinks that in some level, again, in some sense, all the mitzvahs of like mitzvahs v'nin l'chavera, right? Now there's two levels of mitzvah v'nin l'chavera. Again, there's mitzvah v'nin l'chavera like not saying lashon hara, which is in l'chas dayas. People say, oh, so that means that it's a midah, not a mitzvah. There's like all the chacham that are against the Chavetz Chaim, which Chaim thinks it's halacha, and really it's musa. But all don't make a difference. But there is a difference. What's the difference between not speaking lashon hara and stealing? Why is the not makbid on both? But what's the difference? No, there's some difference. The difference is how far removed it is from the secondary goal, or the goal of being a good person, right? Because of course stealing makes you a bad person. But what is it about? What is a bad person? A bad person is a Mesapel Lishnar. For example, Mesapel Lishnar is already a little bit further, but in some sense, like that's the definition of a bad person. A bad person is someone who has Natkima Natira, right? That's more halachos that says over there in the end of Halachas Dayas. A bad person is someone who, again, is like out of the derech ha'emtza and a bunch of different things. Too much gava or too little gava, which no, you shouldn't. Anyways, and so on. And that's the definition of a bad person. Now, in some sense, the fact that we have Chodesh Mishpat is to train you to be a good person. And someone then I can say, wait, maybe that's backwards. We even have to be a good person, so Chodesh Mishpat should work.
Right.
Yeah,
One more time?
I do think that it goes this way also. Not sure why. Maybe it does go back to like.
Some places that if you're not like a moral person, you won't understand.
Yeah, that's also true. Yeah,
What's behind that? Like why?
because you're gonna be negias. That's the push tip shot.
Second, what was the?
Negias are very dangerous.
What if I have negis to steal? I'm gonna not understand metaphysics.
Yeah, because you're gonna figure out why you're allowed to steal and things like that. And there's it depends. There's two different things. There's bad, but there's being like a ganav, or things like that, and also there is the thing. Yeah, but right. So, and that's the way in which it goes backwards. Like that's why I said I've never figured out exactly if midas are only for yourself or only for others. So the really way of saying it probably is that midas is like just like we say that you can't in Haiti you can't have a yeshiva. You also can't have a yeshiva in your own mind when it's full of bad midas. I think mostly because they're distractions. The main reason, that's how I usually understand it, mostly because it's distraction. Like someone could say, well, I could be a groise fresser and understand Lamdas. Well, you could, but not at the same time. Right? And people think that midas is midas is what you do, it's not what you are. There's no R. What you are means what you're used to doing, right? And the problem with being a groise fresser, well, the Rambam would say literally something like this, like the Chofetz Chaim said, like you have to paint Peletek Gemara on your house. Like if you're a groise fresser, well, a nefesh rechaver, right? Fresser. If you're oiv kesef lis bakesef, then it's not really only about the time that you're fressing the pizza, which is stamazly hard to learn at the same time. Some people don't manage, but it's hard. But it means that you have to work more in order to have money for that, and you have to take over your life. So it's just a question of like what you spend your time doing. I don't think it's so hard to understand that in reality, most smart people are sort of ascetic. I mean, I know that people nowadays like to laugh at this, but the reality is like if you go in how big of a fresser was Einstein? Again, he was also a groise fresser, but in the times that he was learning, it was mifshit. It's very hard to do both at the same time. In different times, as I say, that's the taka you don't learn that much. What am I saying? The point is, so what I'm saying is that it seems to be, I don't know how to explain this correctly, but you could say simply that you could be like a novel B'Shas Torah. You could say like you could think of Chodesh Mishpat of all these svarim of like as like just like halachos or something, and they're not trying to make you into a good person. Then you're not going to be a good person, and then both society won't work because Hamida Devarem al Torah is not a recipe for a good society either. And also, especially you won't work, which is maybe the same thing because you're also part of man. You're not going to be able to think. You're not going to be able to learn if you're busy with winning the Torahs. Winning the Torahs also takes a lot of time, even when you're right. So something like that. But it seems to me, I don't know. I mamish don't know. Like the Rambam mamish, I think there's even in some sense even a bigger chiddush. And maybe there's Mamur Chazal, like all the Bala Musa have Mamur Chazal for these kind of things. I mean, the truth is that it's psukim, but this V'alachte B'drochav, which becomes like one of the most basic mitzvahs in the Torah, because V'alachte B'drochav means Ma'orachem, and so on, and Ma'hu Shoifet Tzedek in some sense, and that's why you have to have Dayanim, and that's why you have to have the whole Chodesh Mishpat, and maybe in some sense that's also why you have to have Kedusha, and Zmanim, Ahava and Zmanim are more related to Yichud Hashem, but Kedusha, flow, all these things are really in a sense part of Prishas. That's the Rambam's understanding of it, and it has to do with again either with like I say, Midas always has these like two directions. It faces here. He's talking mostly about the Chevra facing, but it's also internally facing somehow because just like you need a good society to be able to build a yeshiva, you need to have a good soul in order to be able to have a mind, something like that. I think. Not entirely sure, but it's still interesting. So again, we see again the same like two levels, right? You could say the mitzvah of the Rambam, for example, says this, that most mitzvahs actually have both. It's very interesting. The Rambam says that most mitzvahs teach you both midas and dayas. For example, there's a famous parak about Shabbos that the Torah has 2 times on Shabbos, and the Rambam says so. It's very simple. 1 time is Kishesh Yisrael Mosas Hashem. That's correct opinions. That's in Shalom Shema. But the second time, it's Yis Mitzrayim, is Gif. The Eibush take us out of Mitzrayim, so therefore Maybe therefore we have to have, it's not clear what the exact Indian Agif over there is. Maybe just simply that we could rest, or we're not a mitzvah, we don't have to work. Maybe you have to have a Kursa Toiv. It says about Pesach and Sukkot about that you have a Kursa Toiv as a Midah Toiv. So you have to, and you have to not take it off too seriously, because if you're rich, you forget that you were once poor, so you have to remember that you were in Mitzrayim. Things like that. So that's the Midas. So again, these are, so now we say that Hilchas Pesach are also because of Midas and Dais. But Midas and Dais themselves are a mitzvah. Right? And mitzvahs themselves can have two levels. Like you could say the reason we have Pesach is that you should not have Lisikim Lesita, which is itself a mitzvah. And then why can't we have Lisikim Lesita? So you should be able to have a yeshiva. And I keep on saying this yeshiva thing. So you should be able to think, and you should be able to have Yichud Hashem. Or if some things are Avodah Zarah, it would go through the same two levels. So, and I think, so sort of it seems like, in some sense, in other words, in some sense, all then we have to talk about Talmud Torah and Tshuva, but I don't have time today. But we spoke more or less about Avodah Zarah and Dais. But it turns out that all these mitzvahs that he counts in Sefer Hamada are not literally the how do you call it, the most fundamental things, besides like maybe the first few things, but they are the more fundamental things. And maybe you could even say something like this. They're also the chain that connects the two things, right? Because in order to understand, like, if you want Mitzvos of Pesach to make sense for you, you have to have something in between that. You can say, okay, Pesach is like this is a problem that people often have, like they're missing the middle term, right? So you say Pesach, like, if you could jump, like people have this jump. Like you could say, why is Pesach? Well, I don't know Pesach. Why Pesach? I don't know Shatnez, okay? Whatever it is, so Shatnez teaches you that there's one God. How? I don't know, there's one God and he told us not to do Shatnez. What are you missing? Well, the Rambam would say, I don't remember what the Rambam Shatnez is, maybe something also with Avodah Zarah. But the Rambam would say something, you're missing the middle link. Because otherwise you're just saying it's a chak, okay. Maybe the chak also has it, but if he doesn't want things to be chak, so he says the middle link is something like Shatnez is going to make you not like the Zara people, and that's going to make you, so there's actually a full chain of cause, and if you wouldn't have all these mitzvahs, or same thing with not stealing, or you could say not stealing directly, but something like more specific, like, I don't know which mitzvahs there are, and I don't remember those halachos. Yeah, all kind of more specific things. You could say, well, the point of that is not that there is a God, not directly. In order for that to make sense, you need to have, the point of that is to have good midas, and the point of having good midas is to have a good society, and the point of having good society is to have a yeshiva in that society, and the point of having a yeshiva is that there should be one guy in that yeshiva that should think about God. But anyways, that's why this whole set, this intermediate set becomes right. So unlike someone that would say it's directly God, the Rambam doesn't say it's directly God. The Rambam says or directly lead you to God. It leads you to God because you have to go through this the middle stage, which is Sefer Hamada. It doesn't ever explicitly say that. It says it's in Nevuchim that basically most mitzvahs get extend Bilchas Deis, more than Bilchas Torah, if you think about it. And probably most. Like all of Zeraim and all of things is basically the Amen, give something to the Khan, give something to Danim, all kind of things like that, and so on. Or at least all mitzvahs in Lachavayra, and some mitzvahs in the Malkim, like Arayas and Mechalas Asuras. All of them are really Ilchas Deis. So Ilchas Deis is what connects Mechalas Asuras to Yesod Torah. So it turns out to be very important, and really a lot of Yesod Torah is also like this, because in Yesod Torah, something like Mitzvos Kiddush Hashem, I don't know what's like, so there's like enough Avi voice and a voice and Toldes. And I don't know what's like the Toldes of Mitzvos Mechikas Hashem or something like that. But for example, Shavuot, by the way, Shavuot, L'Shavah B'Shem Hashem, the Rambam counts over here, and also in Sefer HaMitzvos. That's another example of something like that. L'Shavah B'Shem Hashem, if I remember, says here, in Perek Lamed Vav, says that it's Misoid HaTorah. But it's not Nilchas Torah, it's Nilchas Shavuos. So again, that could have been for like the practical reason that we discussed, but it could also be that it's maybe sort of more secondary. Although Shavuot is very important, it's the third Dibra and the Sefer Dibra and so on. But it's possibly that Lemaisa in it's like second level, like maybe something like in order for a Shavuot b'Shem Hashem to be important, you need to have Shem Hashem to be important, and that's it. Torah, Shem Hashem, Chikas Hashem, and Kedusha Hashem, and things like that. And therefore, if you're Nishba b'Shem Hashem, then you're making Shem Hashem important. And make Shem Hashem important is a mitzvah for Seder Torah, and Seder Torah is the basic of Seder Torah. Mashu kazeh. That's my basic theory of like all the halachos of Sefer Hamada being like this intermediate step between the most basic halachos which are also in Sefer Hamada, but in some sense really outside of it or like beyond the system. But all these mitzvahs being like the intermediate things, the goals of everything else, but they're not themselves entirely the goals. But it is important to have this in middle level. So otherwise, what I've finally said now is that otherwise nothing else could make sense because you have to end up with a jump, and jumps are bad things. Okay, that's enough. Shine. Oh. I have to turn off my thing. You're still on the phone, you this?